Hey everybody, welcome back to the Edge Report. It's Chris Moeller with you again today. I've got Corinne Murray and Sara Escobar on the show, and we're excited to chit chat about work then place.
Yeah.
Welcome, guys.
Thanks so much for
Thank you
having us,
for,
Chris.
yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, so Sara, why don't you start with what's going on? You guys got a future launch coming? Something?
Yeah, so Corinne and I have been working for about 3 years now on a book called Work Then Place. The subtitle is, of course, navigating modern work and where it happens. Look at that. It's such my baby. I can't even remember its name. But it's really, it has been our baby for about 2 to 3 years
Yeah.
now. And something that we think is really important to get out there to the world.
Awesome. Yeah, it is important. And a little bit about your background, Sara, for everybody. Your past work was Netflix, Riot, Honey, Hulu.
Yep. I started off my career in workplace as employee number 2 at Hulu. So right there on the ground floor, and workplace really didn't exist at that point. Google was offering people everything to be on campus all the time, but we weren't really thinking about how to enable people to succeed through place yet. And so I kind of got to grow that just through listening to the team members at Hulu, and then continuing to grow my career through adding on different elements at each place after Hulu.
Cool. Yeah. Well, and Corinne, you and I are common offenders. We unintentionally met through Freddie Fackelmeyer at
Oh my gosh,
CBS
I forgot Freddie was really the
during
grounds.
during the early days.
Shout out Freddie,
Corinne,
wherever you are.
if he's out there. Corinne was with Amex and WeWork, and CBRE, and our worlds collided a little bit in New York City through some of that brokerage stuff. So, Corinne, tell the world about you for a hot second.
Yeah, so like Chris said, I've kind of I have a passport stamp from a lot of angles of the commercial and corporate real estate world, and Ryan Anderson, I think, is who from Herman Miller is who Miller Knoll now. Sorry, brand. Probably is the one who synthesized it best outside of myself in saying that, like, my mission has been really about understanding this industry, understanding workplace, and aiming the focus more and more towards the people, and not in like the soft, everyone happy people. Like, how do we enable them? How do we enable them to do what they've signed up to do, and turn it into, system change.
Yeah. And that's kind of the intersection where you and I sort of came back together after the work piece with CBRE and some of what I was doing with workplace development, workplace delivery on the commercial real estate side. I started exploring the people side as well. As an entrepreneur, I realized that the future of work looked very different than the past of work. So I'm an academic on the past of work now, which has taken me now into housing. So I'm actually working in housing development now,
Super.
not office development, because I think the future of work is the future of living. We'll get into that in a minute. But it's very interesting to me that the folks who are the most vocal and have the literacy and have the taxonomy around the future of work are the ones that really were started and rooted in workplace at the very beginning of experience in that conversation. So
Sure.
I'm excited that the three of us get to come together because we've got sort of three different legs of the stool, but yet we're all propping up sort of the same thing, and it's people.
For sure.
So that's like the root of the book. It's a system, it's an operating system. Your book is an operating system for people, platform, and place, which is what I call it.
Yep.
You guys have a different take, Sara. Why don't you tell us about your take on the system of work?
Yeah, I think that, we really found a gap that the facilities, real estate people are being thrust into defining the future of work without a whole lot of training in how that should come together. And there's an amalgamation of what executives are saying, what HR is saying, what technology wants to do, and workplace is getting kind of thrown into the middle of bringing that all together and turning it into something meaningful. And so this book is for all those people, the technology leaders, the workplace leaders, the executive leaders, the HR leaders, because we all have to get it to make it work. And right now, there's still a lot of friction going on between all those leaders of, I want to do this and I want to do this. And then the employees are ending up being stuck with no clear direction. And managers are getting stuck with no clear training on how to now manage people effectively without necessarily watching all the time, which was a bad form of management in the first place, but that's neither here
Especially
nor
bad
there.
in a high velocity moment.
Exactly. And so I think we really saw that opportunity to say we have to define this different need of bringing all those teams together and making something meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can hear Corinne's mind working right now just on the sustainable systems and processes. And I can hear her talking about her narrative. So go, Chris. Go, Corinne.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the brain's working so much that it's kind of like, how do we get started? But I think, you know, where all of this kind of exists as a disservice right now isn't because people are necessarily doing the wrong things. It's because they're doing it out of order, you know, and that has become more glaringly obvious in the past, call it like 7 or 8 years. This is not COVID amplified it, but it was a pre-COVID problem of work was becoming more dynamic. More and more people were becoming more knowledge-based workers, meaning that the work was nonlinear. It got to be, it was random, more project-based, which meant that an individual's working needs were more changing and more amorphous. And it's hard to have a built environment, which is physical and static, adapt to those evolving needs. And so as we keep changing and as things keep sort of iterating because of technology, obviously the introduction of AI has just 25x'd it. There's this inertia that keeps pulling, it like keeps dragging us from actually making the change that we need. And a lot of that is because the environments don't have awareness or don't know how to internalize the awareness of what work is, like what work needs to be supported. So the reason we created the process that we did is to help teams identify what are the current working behaviors. Are they the right ones? How do we evolve and iterate them before we touch anything that's physical? Like, let's really get our arms around what needs support. How do we make those changes? And then we can start to audit and evolve the digital, the physical, and the experiential aspects of the workplace to, raise the tide on everything. And that's unfortunately still a pretty novel approach to things, because the traditional way is just the real estate life cycle of like, we sign the lease and we design and build and we move in and we're there for 7 to 10 years, and the assets to like, what's the
I'll just let me put a circle around that. I'll define that as defining for and building spaces for people instead of building spaces and processes with people. And I think that's what we saw, is we need to transition that to with people, because frankly, the one thing that COVID did do is made people's voices very loud in I think a really great way.
Well, yeah, I mean, the average employee became more educated around what they needed to be a successful worker. Because they were removed from the usual environment, they were more aware of, oh, wow, I actually can do this better in this way while I'm in this kind of environment, when I'm alone, when it's quiet. Like, it gave them more awareness to what features they needed to be successful for certain things. How is the pendulum still swung in a, too extreme of a position to really negotiate? Maybe not. But, we need to figure out what that common ground is to say, the built environment is still important, but what is it important for? And so, how do we start to build those inroads for really like the segments of work, not the entire day of work?
Yeah, and how do you weave in not just that physical, but also that digital and experiential with people rather than for them?
Yeah, I call it the Copernican moment for work. So
I like that.
I think that we sort of we have to reorient the way that we look at our organizational structure, like right from the very beginning. Even the concept of the structural features of a modern company, and it starts with how, right? But it has to be circular systems, it's circular economy, circular community, like. I said it years ago, Corinne, remember, like fucking feedback loops. Like that's what we need, guys. Like
Yep.
it's not linear extractive, it's not legacy, it's not calcified, call it whatever you want to call it. If it doesn't have a feedback loop, it's not natural.
Right.
So
Right.
it's command and control. So if you're telling me to go do that, it's a directive, that's fine. But until
call it
we
what it
start to
is.
realize, let's call it what it is, because we do still have to do things. Like there are econometrics associated with whatever, shareholders and the economics that go along with all of it. And sometimes command and control has to happen.
That's a podcast for a different day.
Totally different thing. And that's like with happy hour podcast, because that turns into a longer session.
Yeah. And Chris, that's exactly what we designed in this book, is that circular loop.
Yeah.
Of, you do have to listen and design and have that feedback loop and then execute.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes Corinne and I great co-authors, is I'm entirely execution focused. Like I'm a results driven person, get it done. And Corinne is the thinker and the designer, who also executes, of course. But
I'm more front end of like, how do we create? How do we make sure that the inputs we're investing are quality, match what the need is, so that way whatever those outputs and the execution are as close as we can guess to what's needed. That sets us up for a more effective evolution going forward.
Exactly. So it's really a blend of the thinking, designing, executing, going back around and making sure it aligns to your thinking.
Right.
Iterative design, vernacular, the words matter. And that's why I call it the Copernican moment. I think we're starting to realize now that how we work is completely changed. I wrote a piece about 2.5 years ago, which is, I think, sort of the beginning of the end of the office work for me. And it was about bifurcation. And it was, my concept was that we had space makers and we had place makers. And the space makers were the ones that were really thinking in terms of holistics. They were thinking about things, not agentic design at the time, but along that, really circular thinking,
right?
Where we have a platform, we have technology, we're distributed. How do we put together the space of work? Then we had placemakers that were always trying to take product innovation and make it work. And we still need both of those things. There's 100% have to have experiential design. But that bifurcation is really sort of, to me, was the beginning almost of a new industry inside of an industry. And that's where I realized that, to me, future of work isn't really about work. It's definitely not about knowledge work. It's really about future of living.
Yep.
It's about living systems.
Yep.
So, you guys say in here so well that, exploring the employee wellness being inseparable from productivity. Like that, putting nature back into this. We're human.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know about you guys, but like, I'm inviting AI into my loop. I'm the human. So when I hear that people are talking about where does the human in the loop, I'm like, what are you talking about? No. The sun's in the middle of the universe. So, this is a tool for us. Invite yourself back to yourself and then put some tools around it.
And use your humanness. Yeah. Use your humanness, right? I think that we've gotten so stuck in routine, right? And just executing on that routine rather than recognizing that our humanness is what comes out of our brains.
Yeah. I mean,
and how we connect those dots.
And that's another sort of another rabbit hole to go down too, of like, done well. And obviously there are big macro issues with the existence of AI, who's in charge of it, et cetera, et cetera. But like, the presence of AI lets us actually be more human, because a lot of work today is routine, highly detailed stuff that actually suffers because of human error. That when applied well, when integrated well into, what the future of the workforce can be, it lets humans be creative. It lets us be nonlinear and hop into projects and bounce and do all these things, because there is a consistent and stabilized foundational layer that allows that creativity to ebb and flow, which is the natural human dynamic. And, the reason we touched on AI, partly because we had to go back and write it in because so much obviously has changed, even since, the second draft. So, I went in and made sure that we acknowledged it because so much had changed. But to me at least, a lot of what I found so important about how we wrote this book is that it's intended to be evergreen. You know, the approach to transformation is pretty sort of predictable, and not, you know, not that it's not innovative or not thoughtful, but it's predictable in that, like, these are just the stages of things that need to happen. There will be another AI in the future. There will be another disruptor. You know, this is the fourth industrial revolution. There will eventually be a fifth. And so this is meant to just internalize whatever the changes are and help people metabolize change on an individual and group level, and then figure out what to do on a system level.
And apply that to how people work in a way that hasn't previously been consistently applied, right? There are definitely people in the industry that are designing work this way. And when I say designing work, I'm saying how, not just buildings.
Right.
And I think that we just wanted to relate that for people, to relate change management for people that are designing work in a way that isn't applied consistently.
Yeah, you guys did a great job with that. You know, it really is both a reference and a field guide. And I think that's probably intentional in the way that you wrote it. Because there are just things that, like, I know in the world that we live in today, we believe that there's no such thing as truth or fact, but there really actually are those things. So it's nice that you rooted it in, you know, both your experience and then reference, but then it's also meant to be evergreen, right? It's meant to be a field guide that people can take with them. I finished a book. I don't know if you guys have ever done any research on Peter Drucker. He was the
we
guy
mentioned him.
Yeah, do you?
He's in chapter 5, I think.
Awesome. So I just finished reading, like, last month. I read Landmarks of Tomorrow.
That's what we referenced.
It was written in 1957, and the reason that I went into all of that was because I was getting so tired of the same words, and I was like, by the way, who even coined the term knowledge worker?
That was him.
When I went
75 years ago.
When I read it in 1957, the most amazing thing was chapter 10, was his last chapter, where he sort of he paints this really interesting picture. I can't tell if it's utopian or dystopian. I think it's dystopian. But he talks about how at some point we're going to stop educating ourselves. And that's a concern that he had. And his concern was that we will eventually, as knowledge workers, think that we know everything. And then there'll be a great time when something comes along and reinforms us that we have not been doing a lot of self-educating or staying self-educated. Now, when I run my workshops, or if I'm up on stage now, Corinne, you haven't seen me in a minute.
Yeah.
I have a lifelong learner t-shirt that comes with me on every time I get up on a stage, because the older I get, and I just turned 50, the more I realize I don't know anything.
Yeah.
But I have all of these tools that know everything. So it's like we're living in such a strange time where Peter Drucker goes to spirituality.
Yeah.
He goes to the point where it's like, look, man, your culture is based on your ability to think. And if you don't continue to educate yourself forever, knowledge work is going to go away.
Yep.
And he said that in 1957.
And my favorite Peter Drucker quote is, "There's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all."
Bingo.
And we have to be the ones that discern what that is.
Yeah.
No one's going to do that for us.
Yeah.
So it's part of the reason why we reference Peter Drucker's work so much, is because it's been around since the 1950s and we're still making the same mistakes.
Yeah. And there's a warning. Literally, chapter 10 is like a complete warning. And I don't know the last time you picked that up, but pick it back up and just like sit through it if you want to, like, mind blown.
If you want to look at today and then read that and be like, oh no, we're here.
Yeah, I mean, I kept flipping back to the front going, this really is a first copy of 1957 book. Yeah. Like, it's so amazing to me how circular some of these things are. And, you know, I've been building now inside AI models for about 3 years, really. Never to this fever pitch, because now all of the businesses that I'm invested in are all invested in. So I need to understand, like, not only like what's the subscription model, how much does it cost and what does it do, but like, how do you build these things?
Right.
Yeah.
So I've been down that rabbit hole. And one of the things that I think is absolutely fascinating is how much humanness has to be built into a neural network, so that the parameters work and speak and act and function like a person.
Yeah.
And that's all through executive function. It's all through the same things that we are. So they are learning exponentially about themselves, meaning the machines, the agents.
Yeah.
And I always say, I'm concerned that we as humans are not keeping up with evolution because the technology is getting exponential. But we as humans, I feel like, are still in like an R&D lab from the 60s with a bunch of like white guys smoking cigarettes. You know, it's what it feels
If
like.
that.
We're getting into the scary conversation, right?
Okay,
Where can AI actually replace our humanness? And my hope personally is no.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's learning. It's learning how our humanness comes together, and we have to evolve to make sure that we keep our humanness.
Yeah.
I don't
Corinne,
necessarily
what was
believe.
your major, Corinne?
Say it again.
What was your major? What did you study in school? I can't talk about
Religious philosophy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's right. And that's why I think you are 100% future proof.
I know.
So people ask me all the time, like, if you could go back to school, knowing what you know
Mhm.
now and being able to predict the future, what would you study? And I tell immediately physics and philosophy.
Yeah.
If anything philosophical, whether it's religious based, theology, sociology,
Just stuff about humans, learning about humans and groups. Because, you know, what my academic experience was not, okay, this is Judaism and this is how they believe in God. This is Christianity and how they believe in God. It was, how did these religions actually affect the cultures? You know, what were the people who believed in these things doing out in the world? So, you know, I was learning about symbolism and how, you know, religious iconography influenced nationalist iconography, and like how these things translated into secular spaces to the point that like it's a little insidious. But it started clicking for me how I loved college. I loved learning. I high five to 18-year-old Corinne, because because that was a fun phone call home being like, hi, I'm going to study religious studies instead of something more practical. But it really started clicking at WeWork. And part of it was because WeWork was such an exaggerated culture. It was like sort of like the startup of startups at that particular point.
Yep.
And it was like, it had its own dogma. It had its icons and its rituals. And so, you know, I'm seeing it through this lens of like, I had noticed it at other organizations too, but it was like very abundantly clear there. And so my studies completely inform how I see this work, because we are humans and humans are meaning making species, and we do it even if we don't claim that we're religious. And so it's everywhere. And so that understanding the emotional drive behind meaning is what shapes a lot of our experiences, even if we're sort of like blind to what that influence carries. And so like when we think about that in the lens of an organizational culture, you know, it has more teeth, it has more weight than I think a lot of people realize. And it's also a transactional experience of, this is the place where I log on or I show up and I get paid for my time. But
ultimately, you spend more time there than you do anywhere else.
Right.
So that has to be a meaningful experience.
Right, for the individual, but I don't think that it doesn't translate in most organizational systems. And it's hard to convince a company, because companies don't have feelings. You know, companies are an it, not a they. And we can't necessarily convince a system to care about its people, but we can convince a system to care about outcomes. And so like to me, this has been like the battle. Like this is the boulder push up the mountain of we understand the emotional value of this work. We understand the emotional value of creating good experience, because, you know, happy people, or happy, satisfied, whatever adjective we want to use, they do good work. And so how do we facilitate experiences that sustain and maintain that, you know, that solidness or that contentment, while also creating healthy challenge? Because that generates positive outcomes for a company's bottom line. And so like translating that very heart-centered stuff towards the P&L is the challenge that this work has. And that's why we took the time to talk about why the general approach to employee wellness is not effective, because it's not tied into the bottom line. It's an appendage. And why when employee experience is talked about, it's mostly only talked about through the lens of hospitality, rather than the sort of UX interface of what enables or disables your ability to do what you need to do on behalf of the organization. Right. So it's it's a big shift, and it requires more functional expertise. And that's part of why we wrote it in the way that we did, is we wanted this to sort of help companies, help teams identify where their skill gaps are. And meet that moment.
Everything that I've learned about modern business now has come from my time on the farm. Because
it's an ecosystem.
It's about yield, and it's about ecosystem. So, when you have inputs and outputs, and you understand the circularity of the process of growth, it really does start to make sense to re-engineer or reorganize our organizations into something of natural process rather than something of mechanized,
that's right,
linear construct. And you care, you want your tomatoes to grow. You want, there's nothing worse than going out to your tomato plants and seeing the squirrels that got into them, or the raccoons or something. Like, that's it. That's it for the season. Like, your next bloom cycle is next year.
Yep.
So, that having that necessity being the mother of invention, and taking that sort of farm approach, and taking that organic, circular growth process into yield. And you're talking about quality versus quantity. I mean, there's so many things: nutritional value versus, the store-bought tomato versus the organic heirloom at grandma's. I mean, there's so much parallel that comes out of that.
And that's that. I mean, you're really hitting on why we wrote the book the way we did. It is separated into, 9 different sections that are tabbed into those different sections, because we recognize not everyone's going to be starting at defining your what and why. Some people are going to be at the phase where they need to operationalize it, or they need to figure out how to leverage their ecosystem, or they need to adapt to changing situations within the company. And so those are all literal chapters of the book, so that people can go to where they need to go based on the moment they're in.
Yeah. And all of section 1 is like the prerequisite, like, because I think that's, that's the other thing too, that is becoming increasingly important as AI becomes more integrated, not just into life, but into business, which is social contract needs to change. How people relate to one another, how our threshold for experimentation and testing needs to be heightened. And that only happens when there is, when there's transparency and trust. And, those are words that get thrown around all the time in leadership trainings and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people don't know how to operationalize that stuff. And so, section 1 is really, it's us laying the foundation of, like, these are the things that we need to sort of set straight for the record. And then we start to dig into sort of like all the sort of tranches of the organization that need to be primed for a transformation to really stick. Because you can start doing change, but if you're doing change on a faulty foundation, it's not going to hold. And so, it's sort of, like we said, it's circular, but there does need to be that solid foundation of what are you building on, or what are you growing on?
Yeah, common language. So I'm one of my volunteer organizations is I'm the director of environmental literacy certificate program at a school called Oak Hill Academy, and it's not trees and plastics, although that's part of it. It's time and space. It's where you are in the world. That literacy, that environmental. It's like when you take the word sustainability. It's been so overused and ripped up and whatever. Like I killed that word publicly twice, once on stage and once in writing. I do think we do need to sustain at a certain point, but we're not at a point of sustenance right now.
No.
So we've got improvement to get to thriving, then we want to sustain. I'm not okay with sustaining the current systems that we have. And it's really important to choose the right words and have a common taxonomy around what is being done so that you can then create that platform you're talking about, Corinne, right? And then you can start to operationalize that, Sarah, so that everybody, like, when they hear a word, it's not just a word that's been
Totally.
baked off 100 times. It's like an action word.
And it's all about the right preparation. I know we've said it multiple times now, but I learned that in my master's program as well, because I learned that as a results-oriented person, I needed to lean into that preparation. I did my master's in organization development at Pepperdine, and it was all about preparing yourself first to be able to then serve others.
Yeah.
And I think that so many people just jump into, this is what's got to get done, I'm going to go do it. And I will admit I was one of them. I've now had to take a lot of time to figure out how to prepare first.
And that's what's important about this shift into modern work. It's really the shift into modern living. And, for me, I've been sort of on this futurist urban planning perspective. If I were to create a city of the future, what would it look like? And mine looks different than a lot of other people's. I get to build mine virtually first, because I'm a big fan of digital twins. I don't think that we need office space to inform office space. I think we can do that digitally. I think we can do the same thing with communities and with cities. We had SimCity. Microsoft came out with that a long time ago. You could nerd out in the game.
I've played, we know.
Yeah, like Minecraft building, like you don't have to go out and spend $40 million and then go, oops.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't make sense. So it's the future, the future of work is the future of cities. It turns into urban planning, it turns into land use, it turns into environmental impacts, civil. And it's really about infrastructure. And even that conversation has changed. It's not 50s infrastructure anymore. We can land planes on the interstate. That was for civil defense, and it connected states, and it did the network effect of the 50s. Eisenhower was a smart human and put together the interstate system for the United States, and that connected all of us. But that's where we are again. Our infrastructure is right now, the future of work infrastructure is very far behind. We're talking about kilowatt hours. We're talking about compute, what they call MACs, MACS, and FLOPS, FLOPS, which is the compute power, the brain, basically all these chips that we talk about. And then data storage, plus the natural resources it takes to do this, power and water.
Yeah.
So I didn't note anything in your book about that. Let's talk about it though, because it's sort of future,
Sure.
right? Yeah. Modern infrastructure versus future infrastructure.
This is kind of, I'll hop in real quick, but I know Corinne has a ton of thoughts on this, so I'm going to pass it over to her pretty quickly. But this is kind of one of the things that could be applied with the process within the book. I think, we can see that infrastructure needs to grow. We can see that downtowns in most cities need to be redefined. It's something that you can apply to the process that is within the book to then redefine those. But again, we didn't want to use that as the topic of the book, because we know that eventually that will pass. If you look at the history of downtowns, it's cyclical. They die about every 10 years and get redefined. So we wanted to make sure that cyclical approach was within the book. But Corinne, I'll let you go now, because I know you have.
No, you gave me more time to chew on how I wanted to say it. So this is
philosophical thoughts. Here we go.
So we both identify in some ways as work futurists, workplace futurists. Like, obviously, we wrote this book to enable the future. Even, we framed it in modern work because of urgency, but it is about the future. I have like a bit of a gripe about how most futures work is handled, because it's so speculative. And I know that it has a purpose, because it challenges, the people that are on the fringes to conceptualize and figure out if those things work. So I'm not saying that needs to go away, but there needs to be a counterbalance of who's actually trying to facilitate the future from happening in the moment, happening in the moment. And so I personally identify with being that conduit for the immediate future and dealing with what's in the here and now or what's around the corner. And also, because we focus on this stuff, like, the three of us and folks that are like us, we are already on the fringe. And so what we see is still 5 years ahead of what other people are seeing. So there's this like weird dynamic of, the Cassandra effect of like yapping about stuff that no one understands until they understand it like after the fact. And they're like, oh, that's what they were talking about. So there's like that conundrum to deal with. And also there's very tangible stuff that needs changing right now that we felt was more resonant to the book, that leads to the more sophisticated conversation about the stuff that you're talking about. Like, I would have loved to dig into like the actual brain power of knowledge work and why we're burning out faster, because knowledge work requires the highest level of brain power that our human brains can offer.
I think we actually had a debate about going that direction in the book and decided not to.
Because that would have been another 2 or 3 chapters to satisfy the challenge that presents.
Right.
So it just was a matter of like, how do we address the current moment? How do we give enough hint into the future to sort of inspire people but not freak them out?
Yes. And that's why, for me, Corinne, and you and I rolled our eyes years ago, like in these conversations, right? I remember sitting having coffee with you and talking about it, like the first time we met face to face. And I was like, okay, she totally gets it, on to the next. As an entrepreneur, my job is to see around corners. So, if I build for right now, it's too late.
Right.
When I see change management, those are obstacles in the way of growth for me. So, I've focused specifically on emergent markets, and I've focused on, planting the seeds in fertile soil so that we can give them the patience to emerge. Totally. And then we can get to yield and talk about that later. And there is just so much entropy in change management in the workplace right now that's when I sort of checked out and said, all right, I these are my people. I love them. But I can't listen to being tied to outcomes anymore.
Yeah.
I can't listen to return to office mandates anymore. I'm a builder. I have to understand a unique selling point and an ICP, getting to a direct customer profile so that I can focus on solving a problem for the future. And that's how I landed on housing, because to me, I've got an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and I'm watching the economics of the future organizations that we live in change. And I'm looking at the influence technology is going to have on the middle, the middle part of these organizations. And I'm saying to myself, how do I get these kids prepared so that they don't move home? Like, my job as a parent is to kick them out of the nest, and I'm here to support them and love them. But in what place does it make sense that $68,000 pays for a $500,000 house? Wages trailing.
Never.
Income is trailing the cost of living. And I don't believe CPI. I just wrote a bitch session about that because I think our consumer price index was 1919. We came up with inflation. So it informs fiscal policy. Yeah, it does. But that CPI measure is just there so that stakeholders at massive companies can get away with not giving people a raise. Like, so anyway, the point is I want to transition the conversation to like really the future of living. Like, how do we get, like, I like to say from WeWork to Rework. Let's frame it that way. And since you worked at WeWork and you mentioned that it felt like it had a culture and a dogma and icons and all the things, like, what is Rework?
I find myself, I recall an article that Dror Poleg wrote probably about like 3 years ago. And it was around this time. And he just like mapped out a very lovely utopia around, that felt circular. People were working, but far more fractional part of their days and their weeks. There was, more investment in like sort of whatever scholarly things were important then. So anyway, I wanted to just mention that because that whatever he wrote really rooted into just like what I believe would be incredible to see. But how we get there I think is part of, that was another sort of like underlying driver for us writing the book, is like, I have a fear that this change is going to be a cliff. And if our book can help some teams have this be a bit of a graduated step down process of figuring out how to use people's time better, and maintaining community, community in the corporate setting, I'll put air quotes around, but in any case, like maintaining stability while this change is happening, instead of it just being like, we're at the end of we're about to run off the cliff into a ravine, is like, it's on my mind. And it's still too early to say where that shakes out, but rework as the end state, I think, is that something similar to like what Dror mentioned, of like, work still exists. We are busy. We're busy. We want to be busy. I think what we will wind up doing is have it be more mutually based. So it'll be more mutual aid of like, we are back in community and we're doing stuff for one another because we have the time. Because there's time back. I think that's the currency that really gets changed the most in the future, is who owns the time. And people who, like, when time becomes more of our own, rather than, 40, 50, 60 hours working and then, rotting on the couch or rotting in the bed because you're so burnt out and you can't do anything else. Like, that time then becomes yours. You want to be a farmer? Be a farmer. You want to be an artist? Be an artist. You want to learn, want to be a teacher? Go for it. So like, it lets us be more human. So sort of tying back to what we had said about, that's the real upside of AI in good conditions, of that it takes away the time consuming stuff that drains us and burns us out, and lets us do the, bounce around to the things that really make us human. So to me, that's the end state. But I'm worried about the middle.
I really think you're talking about productivity, right? And it's not just productivity in work, it's productivity in life. And I think that's what we're all aiming for, is how do we balance that productivity of not just delivering at work what we've got to deliver, but delivering across our life what we want to deliver as well. Yeah. And I will tell you, you guys both get to, in your jobs, in your lives, sit in the strategic of it all, right? I tend to, with my work, sit in the execution of it all. And I think that those conversations, especially with leaders, are hard because they are rewarded based on the productivity of work. And that measure of how productive people are is not defined well. And
one of the worst defined metrics ever.
Oh, so awfully defined. And
we have a section we have a section on that in the book too.
And so I'm going to say in the last 3 years of the conversations I've had with leaders, which have been a couple of dozen, I've been lucky in the last 3 years with running my own consultancy and taking the roles I've taken to be exposed to a couple of dozen different companies that are going through this change. It's been a hard conversation of how do we maintain control while increasing that productivity. And we all have to learn how to let go of that control. So you have to remember, this is all encapsulated in fear of losing control.
Bingo.
So it's just, there's a lot to play with there. And we're hoping that this will teach companies how to retain that control in a different way while promoting productivity across all of life.
Yeah, if you love it, set it free. How about giving that a shot? Like someone, you got to take a leap off of that same cliff, Corinne.
Yeah. Well,
like,
I mean more of
you may not want to, but embracing fear and going through a hard thing is what allows us to come out the other side.
The cliff you're describing is the cliff we're at now. My fear is the cliff 5 years out, when the 40-hour work week might get slashed into the 20, and then there's a mental health crisis because no one knows what to do with it because it's too stark of a change.
Coupled with the fact that we have,
with everything else,
a faded wage and economics that don't make sense. So that's, to me, again, my foray into the future of living has brought me to pathway communities, and our purpose for pathway communities is to stabilize the cost of
Yep.
housing. I'm looking at housing as an operating
Mm-hmm.
system. So, everybody looks at the product of a mortgage or a lease and says that's the cost. No, it's not. It's not even like a tenth
Right.
of the cost. The cost of housing is all the other things. It's your utilities, your taxes, your insurance, your
Your
maintenance costs,
maintenance.
like everything. And when you look at, just take maintenance alone, right? We need 375,000 electricians right now in America. That's how short
Yeah.
we are. So if something goes wrong with your house, I just had to change an outlet.
Sorry,
out.
hang on.
And, oh, that's
Working.
okay. I had to change an outlet out, so I bought a GFCI outlet. It was $30, 30. And I was like, oh my goodness, like if I had a house to build right now, just with the materials cost. So, again, stabilizing housing and making a housing product that actually functions inside of the new economy has been fascinating to me, because I think, Corinne, to your point, Dror posted something today, and my question was, is the paycheck gone too? That social contract, the salary, like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, does the salary even make sense anymore? I'm a consultant. I haven't had a salary I'm an entrepreneur. I've never had a salary. So, I it's not foreign for me.
Yeah.
Where I can
we've gone
not
down
do well for 2 weeks and still not get paid.
We're down a little bit of a dark path, but that's why I think that it's got to start with the businesses, right? Like, they have to catch up so that people can live life.
Right. And again,
which is why this is written in a way that helps businesses catch up in a way that promotes living life.
Well, and I think, the other piece to that too is, like, obviously we wrote this for the leaders that are either like in the trenches doing the work, or the leaders that are overseeing and, influencing the work. But we also really wrote it for workers, people who are just managing people, or people who are just in organizations trying to just figure out what comes next, because obviously there are degrees of influence and authority in this, like, in making these changes. But even if you manage a team of 2 or 3 people, you can still make the changes that exist in the work process around what lets us do our job best. Like, because not that many people know how, and this is stuff that I talk a lot about with Sophie Wade around work design, like designing work around what are the tasks, who's responsible for what, and how does that, like, who's responsible for what, or what is responsible for what, depending on whether there's an agent or some sort of tech that's doing it. Because we need to get down to that granular level in order to build, we need to disassemble the clock that, we know the clock is working, but is it working the right way? So we need to take apart all the gears and all the systems, figure out how to fine tune everything. And it's going to look a little different by each business unit and by each organization. But work is work. We're all working with the same components. It's just, it's going to be shaped differently depending on specific contexts.
And I will say there's this group of consultants that are trying to do this, and all of us included here, but you were talking to Sophie, we've been talking to Dror, I've been talking to Georgia Collins over at CB. Like, there's this group of consultants. It's not enough. There's got to be more people that are getting impacted by this, which is ultimately what drove us to write the book, because we're like, God, if we can just get 5 more people that wouldn't have access to a consultant that's helping to lead them down this path, at least we're doing something to help impact the future positively.
Well, it's, it's building on the education that people just, like, crash course learned in 2020, like, I think both of us feel this way. We have a book as a result of it. This needs to be more universal knowledge, not consulting thought leader knowledge. And I think that, that's kind of what Sara was pointing to, is like, this is still thought leader knowledge. And it's great. It's still fringe in a way. It's novel. Only a few of us, and only, the senior people who have been around the block more than twice, are the ones that are really trying to think about these, really minute dynamics. But this doesn't change until there is sea change. And so how do we build sea change without getting this out to the average person? And I like the answer
So
is I don't think we can. So like that's really part of why the book is here, is because it can't just be industry knowledge. It can't just be executive knowledge. It needs to be everyone's knowledge.
yeah, and that's why, I paired your book with Peter Drucker's book Landmarks of Tomorrow, because he mentioned specifically just this when I was saying that there's a pause in
Yeah.
education. That's exactly what's happened now, and all of a sudden the core information is only coming from thought leadership. It's not coming from everywhere. So like we have stopped educating. So we've got to go back and take the words of the consultants, the words of the thought leaders, the words of the people who continued down the path of education and fulfillment, and we have to bring that back to the organization so that it starts to evoke change inside of leadership thinking. And that's really, really hard to do when the world is moving forward.
We're still kind of navigating a certain allergy that companies have to consultant information. Like I think they want to learn. I think they want to know the information, but they don't necessarily take the steps to internalize that message. So like it's this it's
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
really it's the hardest part about being an external partner, is that like
Mhm.
exactly what can be done, and you
Mhm.
can map it out as beautifully as you want, but unless that organization has the right players in place to turn to flip the switch on, it's DOA. And so, it's
Right.
it's this it's the conundrum of like, how do we take this external thought leadership knowledge and then translate it into operational activity? It's it's
Right.
it's hard to land that plane in normal
And
conditions.
we all know, right, we all know you can't execute something unless you're deeply invested in what you're executing. So if a consultant is coming up with it, you don't know how to execute that because you're not as deeply
Right.
invested. You
Mhm.
have to come up with it alongside the consultant or
Mhm.
Yeah.
yourself in order to actually execute it.
Mhm.
And so that's what we're struggling with, is the consultants will define it, but then they're not necessarily internal to
Yeah.
execute it. And then the leaders might be bought in, but they're like, my team's no good because they can't execute it. Well, of course they can't. They weren't
Yeah.
alongside developing it.
My tastiest tomatoes are the ones that I grow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you're connected to the outcome, as Brian Elliott always says over and over and over, and has been saying like on repeat, bless him and bless Nick and bless so many people who are in the data trying to
Yeah.
just get the message out that there is a thing called distributed work.
And also
And
like
literally, like,
pinky nail in comparison to the whole larger swell of things.
right, and the patience that they have, I've commended each of them. Like I'm
Mhm.
so
Better than me.
absolutely blown away with the consistency and stability of their messaging, because it is literally cornerstone to the change, but it is so
Yeah.
small in comparison to like what has to be done. There's a sea
Yeah.
swell. And by the way, again, being that I'm an entrepreneur and an early founder and an early investor in a lot of different companies, the small, new, nimble companies are not having these
No.
conversations. They don't even
No.
know this stuff exists. So, one of
Well,
my speeches is
and
about,
Chris, a lot of it doesn't exist yet. Sorry to
right.
interrupt you, but a lot of it doesn't exist. Like the experts in workplace are just starting to get this
Mhm.
information out. Like I was talking to Nick, he's Nick Bloom the other day. He's still got 6 months to a year before his book comes out.
Mhm.
Like we're figuring it
Yeah.
out.
Mhm. Yeah. And yet the systems that support work, if we want to call it that, or the modern economy or the emerging economy, are all built
Yep.
exponentially. So that's part of one of my talks. When I talk about AI, I talk about accelerating innovation. I don't talk about artificial intelligence. That's a part of it, but I can also flip that and change AI into IA, intelligent
Mm.
automation.
Yeah.
So the reality is that we're on basically additive innovation right now. We need to be on multiplicative innovation, and our operating systems are on exponential innovation. So we're not ever going to catch
Right.
up. Ram Srinivasan was on the show from JLL. He's the head of
Mhm.
AI. A couple times, he and I have been very close for the last few months because we're exploring in some really, really cool space. And he always talks about exponents. If you take 30 single steps at 1 foot increments, you're 30 feet away. If you take 30 exponential steps, you've gone around the earth 27 times. And that's the systems that we have are built to go around the earth 27 times, but we're taking 1 foot incremental steps. And that's not a pause for concern. It's not even a message or a cry for whatever. It's just awareness. We can think that way. We can adopt new models. We are the humans, like I said, in the loop. We can change any of this. We just have to do it. And that's the part that gets hard. And that's the part where rolling up the sleeves is very different than, but I went to school for this. Well, that doesn't matter anymore. Like, I got to dig fence posts on the weekends, like, or the animals will get out. So the fence posts don't dig themselves, and that work that has to be done, if it's not going to be done by humans, it will be trained to be done agentically. So, I think it's an absolutely exciting time. And I think that there is a ton of opportunity because I think that we as humans thrive on change. It's just also very uncomfortable. Growth is painful.
And right now we're not set up to metabolize it well. Like everything's working against our capacity for change, even though it's the thing that we need most right now.
But that's why it's so important that you guys did what you did, right? You gave people a reference and you gave them field notes and they're equipped. I always like to say, explorers use compasses, not maps. And I have a whole section of tools that I'm rolling out on my website right now. We need tools. We need field notes. We need reference. So what you guys are putting out there is super, super important. So thanks for taking the time to come hang out. And a lot of fun.
You're our first podcast. You know that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
You got first.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I will evangelize it to the world because I love what you guys are working on, and it's yeoman's work. It's a lot of work, and hopefully, if you can change just one organization, it's going to change the lives of thousands. So
that's the goal.
That's it. So, where can people get your book and when does it come out?
The book is coming out in early October. We're publishing in early October. You can follow along on our Substack, which is workthenplace.substack.com. We've been issuing some weekly updates just around the context of the book, us writing together, clarifying a couple of things up front so that way people can dive right in and know where to get started.
Yep.
Cool.
And you'll be able to purchase the book on Amazon, Work Then Place, Navigating Modern Work and Where It Happens, or any bookstores.
Cool. That's exciting times, guys. I'm going to need some help when I'm publishing mine. I have it all written. I need help. I need editors. I need crowdsourcing. But my whole it's a mess, but it's been put together. So it's exciting times that you're sharing your knowledge back with the world and creating those field notes. So thanks for the work and good luck.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you.
You bet.
Appreciate it.